Pwede ko palang ipadama sa imong misis kung ano kasakit. Pero hindi ko gid kaya himuon. Kay nga naman sa akong anak, ang ako na lang pod. Ang mo lang gid na ang akong ginangyo sa imuha. Ikaw naman lang gid ang ang pwede nga maghangyo sa iya, nga isumbong na lang niya, miss. Sorry. Hindi naman ko.
O kasabot sa akong gibati. Di parang di ko makatuo nga gahimo ginagawa gyud sa anak ko ba nga hitabo. Sakit eh.
On December 10th, 2021, Cruz Maguad came home in a rush. His children had called for help. He found his adopted daughter Janice in a state of shock. She'd witnessed her two siblings lose their lives in unimaginable ways at the hands of 3 home invaders. The Maguad family was devastated. It was a senseless attack. And why? Nothing from the house was stolen. The case was simply shocking for the Philippines. Things like this only happen in horror movies, people thought. And as law enforcement got involved, it started to look like, indeed, this sounded like fiction more than reality. And at the center of the story was Janice, a poor orphan girl who had just been adopted by the Maguad family. What had Janice done that day? And why? You guys, the answer is horrifying. This is the full story of Janice Maguad. On September 22nd, 2013, a woman stumbled upon an 8-year-old girl on a ship. She was just standing on the dock by herself, looking completely lost. When the woman asked why she was there, she said her name was Janice Sabile. She had no parents and no memories of her life prior to that day. The woman thought that Janice might be suffering from amnesia. Perhaps she'd gotten lost from her parents and was in a state of shock. She immediately posted a photo of her online, in the hopes that her parents would come forward and claim her. Heartbreakingly, no one did. Within a few days, she was declared an orphan and placed in the custody of the Department of Social Welfare and Development. Eventually, a couple with 2 young children hired Janice as their live-in nanny. The couple was good friends with the Maguad family. When she was 17, Janice accompanied her employers to multiple events, and it was at one of these events that she first met Gwen Maguad. She was 1 year her senior, and along with her brother Louis, who was the biological child of Cruz and Lavella Maguad. Gwen and Janice became best friends almost overnight. They often posted videos dancing together on TikTok and quickly became attached at the hip. Louis was 16, Gwen was 18, and Janice was 17. They were the perfect age to be best friends. Louis was the youngest, but he did not behave like it. He played the guitar, drew, sang, worked around the house, and loved helping others. A year or so before, he'd sat his parents down and told them he was going to be a lawyer. He was working hard, well beyond his age, and he had a warm, inviting energy that helped him make best friends everywhere he went. Gwen was also incredibly smart. She went on to compete in every extracurricular activity and academic challenge in high school. Here's her with a completely decorated Girl Scout sash. She was still in her last year of high school when she enrolled at a pre-med prep school just for a challenge. So Gwen was preparing to become a doctor, and Louis, also called Boy Boy by the family, was getting ready to study for law school. But they also had time to make friends and silly TikTok videos with their new bestie, Janice. As they spent more time together, the Maguad siblings wanted to know why Janice was working instead of going to school. Janice's face got sad as she told them that she was an orphan with no memory of before the age of 8. She said she worked all hours of the day and night looking after 2 young children, cleaning and cooking with barely any money to her name. She had no hope for an education or a better future. But how could that happen if she could barely afford to eat? One day, Louis and Gwen sat their parents down and pleaded with them to adopt Janice. At first, the couple was skeptical. After all, they didn't have an extra bedroom, and as educators, they had limited income. But Gwen begged them to help Janice, and Louis even offered to sleep on the couch so she could have his bedroom. Eventually, the Maguads agreed to take Janice in. They even discussed that maybe this was their purpose on Earth. You see, Cruz and Lavella were a teacher and head teacher. It was in their nature to help others, and they were particularly sensitive to children in need. Janice was almost an adult, but she'd had an extremely rough upbringing. To lose your parents and your memory shouldn't happen to anyone. And And growing up in an orphanage with little to no fresh food and good clothing was simply tragic. So in July 2021, the Maguads officially adopted Janice. They enrolled her in school and she even took their last name. But just 5 months later, the Maguad family would come to regret their decision. It was 2:48 p.m. on December 10th, 2021, and Janice was hiding under her bed. She could hear 3 men inside her home, destroying objects and brutally hurting her siblings. She felt helpless and desperate to get some help. She couldn't call her parents or the emergency services though. If she made even the slightest noise, the men would know that there was a third person in the house. For now, she was safe. So she decided to text her parents. But they did not see the messages. They were at work, and their work was at school. At school, you hardly have the time to make yourself a coffee or run to the restroom, let alone be on your phone. As she waited, Janice got more frantic. She knew she had to act quickly if she was to save her siblings' lives. In one last desperate attempt, Janice took to Facebook. At 3 p.m., 12 minutes after texting her parents, she wrote that someone had broken into her home and she needed urgent help. "Help me guys, help me please. Someone entered the house. I don't want to die yet. I am inside the room hiding. Help." One of Cruz's work colleagues saw Janice's posts and urged Cruz to run home. This is a video reconstruction of that moment. Cruz Maguad walked to the front door, but it was locked. Then he went to the back door and kicked it open. He called for his kids over and over again, but there was no answer. Within seconds, he saw what no parent should have to see. Louis and Gwen were lying on the floor, lifeless. They had not suffered clean deaths either. The scene looked like a butcher's shop. Every surface was smeared. Panicking, Cruz called for his adopted daughter. To his relief, Janice was still alive. She had miraculously avoided death by hiding under her bed. Cruz hugged her and noticed her hair was wet. When he asked her why this was, Janice said she had just come out of the shower. Cruz thought this was a bit weird, but perhaps she felt the need to wash off the horror she had just gone through. People do weird things when they're in shock. When the Maguads went off to work on the morning of December 10th, they were elated. Janice had just called them mom and dad for the first time ever. They'd kissed their kids goodbye as usual, and Janice had just made that first step. This is such an important moment for any adoptive family. Janice had finally accepted them, they thought. They couldn't stop gushing over it. By 4 p.m., however, Cruz and Lavella's lives had turned upside down. Their children had lost their lives in a brutal, senseless way, and Janice was the only witness to this horrific moment. They had to console her, but they were inconsolable themselves. When he first entered the house, Cruz noticed a blanket and a knife thrown on the floor. The blade had been broken from the handle. Inside the living room, apart from his children's bodies, there was a baseball bat, shards, and several pieces of furniture and accessories painted red. Cruz noticed what the officers would too. Whoever had unalived Louis and Gwen had a lot of anger. Gwen was even missing an ear. A lot of the injuries had been made to her face. These are not lethal. They're just meant to humiliate. The detectives noted that when this happens, the motive is usually jealousy. Louis had 51 knife wounds. In the report, the officers stated that a hammer, baseball, and kitchen knife were used to unalive the 2 siblings. The only thing Janice remembered from the incident was seeing 3 masked men running away. Of course, she was hiding in her room for most of the time, so she'd only caught a glimpse of them. Detectives put out a reward for information leading to the suspect's arrest. Meanwhile, they decided to look further into Janice's claims. Some things just didn't add up. Firstly, as the first responders had said, this was a frenzied attack led by rage, not monetary reasons. Whoever had broken into the house really wanted Louis and Gwen dead. They did not come to rob the house. Secondly, there were no valuables missing from the house. Finally, all 3 weapons used belonged to the family. Cruz told the officers that he'd put the hammer in the laundry area. It was well hidden and only his 2 daughters knew where it was. The bat belonged to Louis and was stored safely in his room. Neither object was in sight when entering the house. The intruder had to know where objects were before the invasion. The detectives also looked at Janice's past. They found it pretty odd that she would post a long text on Facebook to get help. Also, she'd used 3 crying emojis. Who would take the time to use emojis in a situation like that? And given the improbable intruder scenario, why would she lie to the detectives? Before speaking to Janice, detectives dug through her past. They found out she'd been adopted by the Maguad family just 5 months prior to this incident. Also, in the autumn of 2021, just 2 months after her adoption, Janice got into a bit of trouble with her family. Cruz had just sold one of his pigs for about $200 and put the cash in a jar in his bedroom. That same month, both of his parents tested positive for COVID. At the time in the Philippines, the standard procedure was to spend a week or two in a special quarantine facility. So Cruz's parents were taken to such a facility, but they needed money for food and supplies. Cruz thought this was the perfect opportunity to use the $200 he'd stored in his cash jar, except now it was gone. Cruz asked his wife, Louis, Gwen, and Janice, but no one had seen it. The family frantically searched the whole house for it. That's when Louis picked up Janice's backpack and saw a really guilty look on her face. It turns out that Janice had a secret compartment in her backpack. She'd sewn it to hide money stolen from her new family. Janice confessed to stealing the pig money and apologized for it. She said she had no idea why she'd done it. Cruz and Lavella were surprisingly understanding. Although disappointed, they saw Janice break down and even said she would understand if they kicked her out of the house. They understood it would be hard work to adopt a teenager who had been through so much already. Janice had eons of trauma in her past: abandonment, poverty, emotional deprivation, you name it. Also, stealing is really common in cases of recently adopted children. After they felt there was no one there to soothe, help, or feed them, they often feel the need to provide for themselves. This is not a conscious move. Maybe they know they now have caring families, but they can't fully register it yet. The instinct is to fend for themselves. So Cruz and Lavella forgave Janice and explained to her that this couldn't happen again. They also explained to her that she would never have to worry about food, clothes, or money again, as long as she was their daughter. Of course, she would one day have to work again, but not until she finished school. They made sure she knew she was safe and she didn't need to steal ever again. Shortly after this, the children went into remote learning because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Gwen would tutor Janice until December 10th. The detectives uncovered something else as they looked into Janice's past. Remember how she said she was an orphan with no memory of her family or her life before the age of 8? Well, she was lying. Janice had 2 very much alive parents, Michelle and Juanito Sibil. Janice also had 3 other siblings, including a half-sister named Juliet. Reporters tracked Michelle down and she agreed to an interview. She claimed that instead of working, Juanito spent all of his time gambling and drinking. They lived in a poor village and survived on scraps and spoiled bananas.
Lisod about anong lisod kayo nga ano ba? Di man jud ko mulakaw nga time ato kung okay lang yang amahan. Kamahaw kamuti. Panyodto, magsag-unsa lang kamuti kamuting kahoy o saging, kahoy kaon lang kan ini saging bunsalo ha, bunsalong na daot na saging ba. Kaya para lang naay masulod sa tiyan.
Eventually, Michelle left Juanito and her children. She went to Manila and found work as a housekeeper.
Graduating ko to grade 6 ang kinamagwangan ako. Kailangan yun ako manarbaho para sa iyang gamit. Usay manghuram na lang kog bugas kay maluoy ko sa mga anak nga. Minsan isa kadlaw lugawon lang ko na sa salmon na bugas mais pag yun to. Ipalugaw para makakaon na ako mga anak.
Juanito has never been interviewed, and it's unclear whether he purposefully abandoned Janice that day in 2013 or if she took off on her own. But here's the thing, Janice had been chatting with her mom via Facebook for years. From the messages, it seemed like her mother was happy Janice was now being taken care of. She didn't believe she could provide for her daughter, and she never made any attempt to reconnect with her beyond Facebook. The Maguad siblings were buried at a private cemetery on December 20th, 2021. Over 1,000 people attended to pay their respects. Cruz and Lavella were broken. They could barely function as normal humans anymore. Still, they kept thinking, what had really happened that day? This was not a botched robbery. With no objects missing from the house and such a frenzied attack, this was definitely personal. So while grieving, the Maguad parents also collaborated with the detectives to get to the bottom of the story. Within days, law enforcement had enough reason to conduct a full search of the house. Janice had gone from sole witness to sole suspect. Why had she taken a bath after seeing her siblings' bodies in that state? In a bath, you're at your most vulnerable. If she was afraid of 3 masked men, would she have gone to take a bath and wash her hair? And remember that emoji post on Facebook? It wasn't just the emojis that got detectives thinking. According to the autopsies, Gwen and Louis passed away around 2 p.m. that day. So Janice waited 48 minutes to text her parents and a full hour to post on Facebook. Shortly after writing her Facebook post, Janice changed her Facebook name from Janice Maguad to JP. Wait, what? Was this a very lame attempt at disguising her identity? Did Janice genuinely think the police wouldn't be able to track her down if she changed her Facebook name? Yeah. Also, Janice said she locked the door to her room and hid under the bed until she thought the men were gone. But the room had been ransacked, and there were drops of red all over the ground. If the room was locked, how did the attackers get inside? And how come they didn't notice Janice? So a forensic team came to the house again and searched every corner, including the big land around the house. A few feet from the house, in a creek, a forensics team found a trash bag. Inside were red-stained clothes. They were pretty certain the clothes belonged to the attacker. They had attempted to throw the bag in the creek and let the water carry it away, but the bag had gotten stuck in a branch and it was just swaying in the water. The detectives left with the evidence and told the Maguads that they were now free to clean the house and, well, sell it or do whatever they saw fit with it. For Lavella, the chance to clean and tidy the house was a chance to stop crying. She felt like she had been a zombie for days now. She couldn't stop crying, screaming, or curling into a ball and disappearing for hours on end. Now, she decided she would focus on cleaning the house and slowly work toward a new chapter in her life. When she was tidying Janice's room, she noticed a strange ID. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Marlon. Well, Marlon was the nickname given to him by the media. He has not been officially identified as he was a minor at that time. Lavella rushed in with Marlon's ID to the detectives. That's when they connected the dots. A few eyewitnesses from December 10th come forward to describe this boy. They'd seen Marlon heading into the Maguad's home. A store owner also testified that Marlon had come into his store that day and asked which house belonged to the Maguad family. A motorcycle driver said he drove Marlon to the house that day. Marlon was now the new suspect, but his ID had been found in Janice's room, so she was not crossed off the suspect list. She was at the very least covering for this boy. But why? Janice was brought to the station for an official questioning. She was confronted with Marlon's ID. Why was it in her room? The detectives were not expecting Janice to break down at the sight of the ID, nor were they expecting her to confess. She said, "I had something to do with murders." Janice and Marlon had taken the lives of Louis and Gwen. To this day, it's unknown how Janice met Marlon and what their relationship was. Marlon was the same age as her, and she worked at a local church, preparing it for service every day. Some people speculated that they were dating, but in December 2021, Janice had several pictures of herself and another boy on Facebook, and she referred to him as her boyfriend. Janice and Marlon were friends, at least on Facebook. When the detectives looked through their conversation, they found out that they had been planning to off the siblings since December 1st for 10 days. Their chat revealed something else. Janice had intense hatred for Gwen. Yep, this was the girl who appeared smiling and dancing in Gwen's TikTok videos. Janice told investigators that she unalived Gwen out of jealousy because Cruz and Lavella showered her with love. However, she never explained why she decided to take Louis' life as well. The detectives also questioned Janice's then boyfriend. He was not a suspect, but he revealed an interesting clue. On December 10th, he saw Janice's Facebook post, so he called her. She picked up. Yep, she picked up, even though she claimed there were intruders in her house. But she didn't say anything. Her boyfriend listened to the complete silence for a few seconds, and then he decided to hang up. He figured there were no intruders. Why would there be absolute silence on the other end? He thought his girlfriend was probably playing some dumb prank or was being dramatic. While it's questionable that the boyfriend didn't think to call the police or come to Janice's help, the detectives wondered if this was maybe a clue into Janice's behavior. Perhaps her boyfriend knew that she had an aptitude for lying. Shortly after Janice's confession, Marlon was arrested. In his possessions, officers found Gwen's phone. This was the only object that was missing from that day. Both teens were charged with first-degree murder and sent to a juvenile facility without bail. Once Janice arrived at the facility, the other children there felt so disturbed by her that they requested that she be sent elsewhere. By this time, of course, her case had made headlines throughout the Philippines and even outside the country. So Janice was a well-known name and face, even to other juvenile offenders. As often happens in shocking cases like these, Janice also became a pretty popular figure on the internet. Now people were linking her case to the horror movie Orphan. This is a movie about a couple that adopts a 9-year-old girl after losing their own baby. But the girl is in fact a grown woman, and she's dead set on unaliving the entire adoptive family. The movie was pretty controversial when it came out in 2009. First off, it puts orphans and adoptive children in a really bad light. And its effect was so strong that the adoption rates went down visibly that year. In a way, Janice was just as deceiving as the girl in the Orphan movie. First and foremost, she was not an orphan. She lied about not having parents or memories from the very young age of 8. Of course she had memories. She knew her mom, and she knew her name well enough to connect with her on Facebook years later. She was also aware that she was not an orphan. However, one can argue that to her, her parents were dead, as she felt truly abandoned. Unlike the evil protagonist in the movie Orphan, Janice did have a real heartbreaking childhood. She lived in extreme poverty and close to famine at times. She saw her mother struggle to keep it all together while her father got drunk, violent, and spent the little money that they had gambling. This was a traumatic childhood. No one can argue against that. Also, whether she ran away from her family or her father abandoned her at the age of 8 is almost irrelevant. Both scenarios are horrifying. Then, the running theory goes as follows. Janice didn't plan on unaliving the Maguad family from the get-go. When she met Louis and Gwen, she genuinely wanted their friendship. She was a live-in nanny working at parties that kids her age were having fun at. She craved a normal teenage lifestyle, and she found it through them. When the family adopted her, she was over the moon. However, it was her growing sense of safety and her closure to the family that sent her into a state of rage and frustration. She began to hate how perfect Gwen was. She was smart, beautiful, ambitious, and very much loved by her parents. In short, Gwen was everything she wasn't. She felt unloved and abandoned by her own family. No new family would undo that core feeling. Also, she felt she never had the chance to be as smart or as pretty as Gwen. It's different when you can't afford clothes, food, or an education. You can only get so far. Reportedly, Janice was also very angry at all the house chores that the Maguads were making her do. But this was not Cinderella. Gwen and Louis had the same amount of chores every day. Cruz and Lavella wanted their kids to grow into responsible, disciplined adults who knew the value of work and money. The Maguads weren't super rich either. They were financially comfortable, enough so that they could afford a third child, but Gwen and Louis hadn't been raised in luxury, and they were getting ready for prestigious careers that would allow them to make their own money soon. The Maguads never promised Janice endless riches, just security. However, Janice saw them as much richer than they were by comparison to her own family. So it's possible she expected them to provide her with everything while not asking for anything in return. When they put her to work, she was upset. The Maguads were confused and outraged. Lavella said, "We were so proud when we adopted Janice because we thought God was using us to help this young girl. It was a blessing, but then this is what we get." Cruz said they gave Janice the same amount of love that they gave their own children. It made no sense that she would be this jealous and envious of them. At the end of 2021, Janice's mother Michelle appeared on TV alongside the Maguads.
Sorry po. Hindi naman ko. Hindi ka naman ko. Hindi tinutundok na.
She apologized profusely for what her daughter had done and explained she never saw it coming.
O kasabot sa akong gibati. Di ko makatuo nga gahimo ginagawa gyud sa anak ko ba nga hitabo. Sakit eh.
Cruz and Lavella told Michelle they are not holding her responsible for her daughter's crime.
Thank you gid sa inyo pag-adto.
However, Lavella expressed her pain and confusion about Janice's decision. She said Michelle might be the only person who could understand why Janice did what she did.
Kung pwede ko palang ipadama sa imong misis kung ano kasakit, pero hindi ko gid na kaya himuon. Kay nga naman sa akong anak, ang ako na lang pod. Amo lang gid na ang akong ginangyo sa imuha. Ikaw naman lang gid ang pwede nga maghangyo sa iya nga isumbong na lang niya mi.
In one final heartbreaking twist, it was revealed that Gwen could have survived that day. When Marlon delivered the first blows, Gwen ran out of the house. However, she quickly returned to save Louis and Janice. She had no idea Janice was the mastermind. Janice said that while she was unaliving her, Gwen cried out, "This is just a dream, this is just a dream. I'm still going to be a doctor. I don't know what I did wrong to you, Janice. I love you very much." Few things are more heartbreaking than knowing Gwen's last words were of love to her killer. Initially, Lavella wanted to forgive Janice. The Maguads were spiritual people who centered their careers around helping others. They felt that Janice was a victim of poverty and a lack of education, and that she must have suffered from some unknown childhood trauma. However, all of that changed when Lavella saw Janice in court and noticed that her eyes were cold and empty. After everything the Maguads had done for her, Janice looked like she had no remorse or guilt. She never even apologized to them for her actions. Janice and Marlon were tried separately but received equal sentences. 32 years in prison without the possibility of parole. They will be 50 years old when they are released. They will still have a long life ahead of them. But Gwen and Louis won't, and neither will Cruz or Lavella. Their lives were forever changed by Janice's awful act. Their act of kindness was rewarded in the worst way imaginable. It's hard to stay kind and strong after such a slap in the face, but the Maguads did. In August 2022, the couple opened a restaurant in honor of their lost children, servicing their favorite dishes. They are going to therapy and using their new business venture to remember Gwen and Louis every day. While Gwen and Louis will be honored by thousands, Janice and Marlon will be forgotten in a tiny prison cell. Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about this case? Do you know of any other cases involving orphans or adopted children? Let me know in a comment, and before you leave, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time.